Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic podcast, Genetically Modified Skeptic.
Atheism more often arises in stable, prosperous societies.
No, we're not doing credit. You're gonna give me my fucking money back.
Excuse me, sir. There's a young man in here. You
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am. Right beforehand, you fucking said sir.
Sir?
Motherfucker, take it outside. If you want to call me sir again, I will show you a fucking sir.
I apologize.
Motherfucker.
I apologize now.
Stable, prosperous societies.
Who is a very famous atheist YouTuber, and he made a video attacking Ben Shapiro.
Whores in this house. There are some whores in this house.
And his belief in God. Now, obviously, as a Muslim, I don't support Ben Shapiro because he's a Zionist. And on this channel, we're against Zionism. As a theist, I feel like I have some kind of an obligation to defend the theist position here. So in this video, I will be defending Ben Shapiro. In this video, inshallah, I will be joined by Brother Shimanto. Brother Shimanto is a up-and-coming apologist. Alhamdulillah, he's been doing some really good work. So inshallah, we'll be teaming up in this video, and let's see what Genetically Modified Skeptic has to say.
Listen, there's no way to blame people who don't believe in God because they've experienced enormous amounts of personal pain. God is apart from human beings, and if we understood the mind of God, then we would be like God in his totality, which we are not.
So right out of the gate, he propagates the stereotype that atheism is an emotional reaction to hardship, or that atheists are actually theists who hate God because they've experienced suffering. This is wrong.
First of the gate, he commits the strawman argument fallacy. First of all, Ben Shapiro never said that all atheists are atheists because they're depressed or whatever, right? So that's like a massive strawman. It's a complete misrepresentation.
Countries which are consistently rated as the happiest in the world are also some of the most atheistic countries. Meanwhile, the consistently unhappiest countries in the world are often some of the most religious. This doesn't mean that atheism makes people happy, but it disconfirms the idea that atheism is a result of unhappiness.
And then he shows this kind of like random nonsense data, which shows that supposedly most of the happiest country, quote-unquote happiest country in the world happens to be non-religious. Just because it happens to be the case that some of these countries have a very large non-religious population, that does not mean that that is the reason that is causing them to be happy, right? So here he's committing the questionable cause fallacy. For example, you can easily look at the data, and if you just go to that, I'll give you guys the link below. If you go to the link, and if you look at the data, you could easily come to the conclusion that, all of these 10 happiest countries just happens to be white, majority white. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Right, so one white nationalist, right, could easily look at the data and he could come to the conclusion is that the reason all these countries are the happiest is because there's less diversity, right? As because there's more white people there and there's not much, diversity there. That's why they're happy. So this proves, if your country becomes more diverse, then that means, you're gonna become unhappy. Now, would Drew accept this conclusion? No. So just because there's a correlation between the race, the majority of people being white, with the fact that these countries are the happiest, does not mean them being white is what's causing them to be happy. The same way, just because these countries happen to have less diversity doesn't necessarily mean that's what's causing these people to be happy. Same way, just because some of these countries are the least religious doesn't mean that lack of religiosity is what causing them to be happy. Okay, so of course this again proves that this is nothing to do with race or lack of religiosity, but more to do with economics, right? They're happier because they're more stable economically. There's nothing to do with religion. Now, there are studies that show that religious people are actually happier than non-religious people. Okay, there's a study by Pew Research where they showed that religious people are indeed happier than non-religious people, and this includes all of these kind of like rich countries.
No, GMS, it's not a stereotype. Rather, this claim is a rational one and can be backed up by evidences. It's not just a ban. There are many academics who will agree with this notion. Let's see what philosopher James Spiegel has to say in his book called The Making of an Atheist, where he tried to show that emotional breakdown can lead to atheism. So the author James tried to show this by an example of true celebrity atheists named actress Jodie Foster and George Carlin. The similarity between them is that they both had lost their fathers. In 1999, Paul Sivits published Faith of the Fatherless, where he shows that atheism of the strong or intense type is to a substantial degree generated by the peculiar psychological needs of its advocates. His study shows that atheism has a link with defective father hypothesis, where a breakdown relationship with one's father predisposes some people to reject God. Further explanations on the subject matter of root causes of atheism lead philosophers like James and other philosophers like Elvin Plantinga to conclude that atheism is nothing but a psychological or emotional stance. And James added that atheism literally starts with moral rebellion and some from the cosmic authority complex.
That's not mean you're not feeling the pain that you're feeling. Doesn't mean you don't have a right to feel angry at God. You understand that the struggle with God is a part of religion itself. Being a religious believer is a consistent struggle with the logic of the universe. And that seems to me a deeper and more fulfilling struggle than simply pretending the universe has no meaning at all.
If that struggle gives you a sense of meaning, cool. Go ahead and pursue that as long as you don't hurt others in the process. Meaning is not some objective thing. Different things are meaningful to different people. Just because your religion is meaningful to you does not mean that you have an exclusive claim on meaning. Wrestling with theological questions is not very meaningful to me, but I recognize that doesn't mean it can't be meaningful to someone else. Also, that line, pretending life has no meaning, is just a baseless insult. Atheists don't believe in God-given meaning, but there are other kinds which atheists both believe in and experience.
When it comes to purpose of something, how do we know whether something has a purpose or not, right? Or something has meaning or not? For example, right now, I'm talking to this camera, and this camera has a purpose for its existence, right? Its purpose is to record me, right? Or record other type of stuff, right? So that we can use it. Same thing with a noodle packet, right? The job of a noodle packet is to contain the noodles inside it, right? So that we can take it out and use it to protect it from dirt and whatnot. Now, once that purpose is served, we no longer need the packet, right? So we throw it away because it's meaningless. It doesn't have any meaning anymore. Now, if this is really the case that there is no God and we're just product of random chance, then that means you're just like that empty packet of noodles. Your life has no meaning. Sure, you can give it some kind of made up imaginary meaning, but that's not gonna give it any ultimate objective meaning to your life. Your life is still meaningless. And as a matter of fact, many philosophers and thinkers have pointed this exact problem out, and they've named it nihilism, right? This understanding that your life has no meaning, it's purposeless, it's baseless, right? For example, a professor of University of Texas named Dale Wilkerson wrote a paper on Nietzsche, the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, where he summarized his view on nihilism. He said, Nietzsche's philosophy contemplates the meaning of values and their significance to human existence. Given that no absolute value exists, in Nietzsche's worldview, the evolution of values on Earth must be measured by some other means. How then shall they be understood? The existence of a value proposition, a value positing perspective, and values are created by human beings, perhaps other value positing agents, as aids for survival and growth. Because values are important for the well-being of the human animal, because belief in them is essential to our existence, we oftentimes prefer to forget that values are our own creations and to live through them as if they were absolute. For this reason, social institutions enforcing adherence to inherited values are permitted to create self-serving economies of power. So based on this, we can make this following argument. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not exist, then there is no purpose to our existence. If there is no purpose to our existence, then there is no ultimate meaning in life. Conclusion, therefore, in atheism, there is no ultimate meaning in life, which means nihilism is true.
So in this situation, you believing that your life has value is not different than a child believing that Santa Claus is real. Both are false. This also means that in reality there is no difference between you running over a bunch of rocks to you running over a child. They are both just collection of atoms, and if you believe the child has moral value, then you need to explain why you running over a bunch of rocks isn't wrong and why those rocks don't have the same value as well. If someone doesn't value human life like Jeffrey Dahmer, then it's completely morally justified for him to eat human beings the same way he eats an apple.
This is why in the Quran and in Islam we believe that as human beings we do have values, right? For example, in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 3 190 to 191,
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار.
They are those who remember Allah while standing, sitting and lying on their sides, and reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth, and pray, Our Lord, you have not created all of this without purpose. Glory be to you. Protect us from torment of the fire. Quran 3 190 to 191.
Atheism often claims that religion corrupts mankind.
If you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion.
That the notion of a God blinds men to the truths around them. That science is directly opposed to the idea of a creator.
Do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
None of these things are true.
It's also not true that atheism claims any of these things. Atheism is a singular philosophical position. Atheists might claim these things, and I've heard many of them do so, but it's strange to say that atheism does any of this. If you weren't familiar with many atheists and you heard Ben say this, you might get the impression that atheism entails certain attitudes and behaviors.
So I have to agree with Drew here to some extent. Yes, it's true that atheism itself doesn't necessarily claims that, religion is this evil thing, right? They don't. Atheism itself doesn't claim that. However, secularism does. And as far as I understand it, Drew is a secularist. He is a secular liberal, right? And secular liberalism is absolutely against religion and religious doctrine as a whole. Secular liberalism is well known. It suppresses religious thought. It is completely against religion. It's constantly trying to wipe out religion from the face of the earth. It's a very fascistic worldview. In the US, there's an article, National Center for Science Education, where it says the following: creationism and the law. Since 1968, however, US courts have consistently held that creationism is a particular religious viewpoint and that teaching it in public schools would violate the First Amendment and Constitution. You're not allowed to teach your kids about religion, about religious value. Imagine if the opposite was true, right? Imagine if Muslim country did not allow any kind of evolution to be taught in school. There would be outrage about it. Richard Dawkins would write like 100 different books on it, and yet when they do it, it's fine. They can brainwash your kids, but you cannot, because they're only forcing you to teach what they believe is true. So basically, in a way, they're forcing their beliefs onto you. But as a religious person, you're not allowed to force your belief onto anyone else. It's a one-way street. Colin Yeoman, who I believe is an academic and a philosopher, in his book Creating Citizens, he says, similarly, many proposals for educational curriculum are aimed at developing a measure of autonomy in the children, which often involves having them achieve a certain critical distance from their family background, with its traditions, beliefs, and ways of life. So, kids, basically what this philosopher is saying, that oftentimes in school curriculum, they basically try to make sure that children are no longer affiliated with their parents' religion, religious values. Okay, and basically they kind of like make the curriculum in a way where it doesn't teach any kind of religious values, it doesn't teach about religion, and it only teaches liberal values, right? So they're forcing their religion. Let's be real, liberalism is a religion. They're forcing their religion onto your kids and forcing them to become atheists. That's what's happening. Okay, they're forcing people to leave religion, but of course they're not quote unquote using force, so it's okay. But that's what it is. They're forcing your kids to become atheists, and this is how this is true in all, like, everywhere. I mean, like, even in Bangladesh you see this. I mean, like, they're teaching all this kind of like garbage, kind of secular evolution and all this other kind of nonsense, and the whole purpose they're doing it is to brainwash kids. And this is the type of brainwashing we ourselves went through, and this is absolutely disgusting, because these people, even if you don't agree with their religion or religious values, have the right to hold on to those values. I mean, the fact that these kind of like philosophers openly admit this shows that this has been going on for a very long period of time, and this is one of the reasons why Christianity is actually dying. This is systematic. This is systematic. So this is what I like to call liberal fascism. Okay, they're actually forcing your kids to leave the religion. So based on this, we can make an argument, right? Secular liberals in power restrict religiosity. Premise 2: anyone that restricts religiosity promotes atheism by force. Conclusion: therefore, secular liberals promote atheism by force. But in Islam, we don't believe this. We don't believe that your religion can be forced. For example, in the Quran, Allah SWT says,
لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم.
Let there be no compulsion in religion, for the truth stands out clearly from falsehood. So whoever renounces false gods and believes in Allah has certainly grasped the firmest, unfailing hand. And Allah is all-knowing, all-hearing, and all-knowing. Read about this in Quran 2:256. So what this verse is talking about is that you cannot force someone to become a Muslim. And yet these liberals are so shameless that they actually force your kids to reject their religious values, and this is what they're doing to kids. I mean, this is evil. This is evil. This is satanic, to be honest. And here, this kind of like atheists, who, by the way, gets benefited by this secularism and secular liberalism, and they're gonna be here and promote this kind of like garbage, and they will say that but you can't practice your religion. That's not a problem. When in reality, no, they're lying to you. They're actually lying to you. No, you can't practice your religion. I mean, how are you going to practice your religion when you're not allowed to learn that God created the universe? You're not allowed to learn about things like intelligent design and all these other kind of ideas. You're only allowed to learn about what atheist thinkers think. Then of course your kids are gonna leave the religion. And why is that shocking?
Okay, let's talk about constructing moral frameworks. Shapiro's moral system defines God as objectively good and therefore derives all its edicts from the authority of God. This system assumes God is good, as that idea can't be anything but an assumption.
This system assumes God as good. When philosophers discuss goodness of God, they also speak about why goodness is a property of God in contrast to evilness. GMS try to imply if God says good, then it's good. When theists say that, they meant that God is naturally good. Okay, it's an inherent property of God.
Determining what is right and wrong for him, then, is largely a process of determining what God has said is right and wrong. A utilitarian moral system assumes that some outcomes are more desirable than others. An individual, or more likely a group of individuals, decides what these outcomes are. Then it evaluates based on observation what actions lead to desired outcomes and which lead to undesirable outcomes. Actions that lead to desired outcomes might be considered good, and actions that lead to undesirable outcomes bad. So yes, utilitarian moral systems do have to determine what good is in some sense, but they don't attempt to establish right and wrong in the same transcendent, God-derived sense that Shapiro believes in. Even without an appeal to divine authority, though, they can still work. They're working right now in workplaces, schools, secular countries, or any place people don't appeal to divine authority, but rather to something like harm or the wishes of the group. How is this possible? Most humans are actually really good at determining what desirable outcomes are and coming to agreement on that with others. So many of us are so inherently good at this that it's almost like this trait has propagated among humans because it's been beneficial to our survival or something. All moral systems require assumptions, but these assumptions do not have to, as Ben suggestively puts it, descend from outside of humanity. Moral cooperation can still happen without invoking God, because people are capable of coming to a consensus on desired outcomes without an assumption of God's authority.
So basically they're saying that, you can have values even without the belief in even if God doesn't give you value, you can still have values, right? You can still have moral values and purpose in life. Yeah, sure. I mean, I can believe that, you know, this rubber box here is made of gold. I mean, I can believe that, but that's not gonna make it true. I mean, as an atheist, like, you can believe whatever you want, but like, that's not gonna make it true. The truth is as Friedrich Nietzsche rightly pointed out, if God doesn't exist, your life has no purpose. It has no meaning. And if it doesn't have meaning, then why do anything? I mean, the whole problem with like nihilism is that if your life has no meaning, then if you cut up or slice up an apple, that's the same as you're slicing up a person. There's no difference because they're both the same.
Proponents of utilitarianism or consequentialists place great emphasis on avoiding harming others and strive their utmost to employ a course of action that does not result in harming people, at least in this case in theory, but pragmatically matters are more complex. A government may justify using unreasonable and immediate force against rioters in order to swiftly establish order and stability. Maximizing consequences sometimes makes it susceptible to justify injustice. The bottom line is that human reason is fallible, and we need a greater mind to produce moral guidance to us.
Turns out there are a bevy of logically consistent arguments offered on behalf of God. Take, for example, the first cause proof advanced by Aristotle as refined by Thomas Aquinas. Edward Faison lays out the argument in his book, 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. The argument goes something like this. First, change exists in the world, but all change is the actualization of potential for that change. So something is changing, it's because there is potential for that change in the thing. No potential can be actualized unless something already actualizes it. So that means that all change is caused by something already actual. This means either there is an infinite regress of actualizers, or there is a purely actual actualizer. This is sort of like the old joke about the philosopher and the turtle. The philosopher is asked, what supports the earth? And he says, the turtle. And somebody says, well, what supports the turtle? He says, another turtle. So what about that? It's turtles all the way down. The infinite regress argument is just not convincing. There has to be something underlying the final turtle. There has to be one prime cause. That cause can't have any potential. If you have potential, something else can activate it into changing. There's one unchanging cause that's purely actual. That is the thing that we call God, and it actualizes all of the other changes.
Alright, first of all, I find it strange that Shapiro picked this argument for such a brief section of his video, given how technical and confusing it likely is to anyone who isn't very familiar with Aquinas' 5 ways arguments already. It's not very intuitive. It takes time to understand, time which Ben does not take in his explanation. Is the delivery of this argument really about educating the viewer, or just giving them the impression that this is a very good and sophisticated argument? I mean, what does purely actual even mean? Can something be less actual than another thing? Do things not just exist or not? This is the kind of thing you have to get into and define if you want to educate the audience, not just sound smart as the presenter. But then again, Ben Shapiro is a political pundit, so I guess this is him just doing his job well. So why don't I find this convincing? At the end of the argument, he says,
the infinite regress argument is just not convincing. There has to be something underlying the final turtle.
Why is the infinite regress not convincing, though? This argument relies on our intuition to say that there isn't an infinite chain of causation, but I don't see why we should rely on intuition to determine that an infinite regress is or is not possible. I'm not saying there is an infinite regress, but for this argument to work, it needs to demonstrate that an infinite regress isn't possible, not just rely on us to feel like it's not. That's
Dude, do you like not know that infinite regress leads to contradiction or leads to fallacies? Do I really like to explain like logic 101? So for example, just take the example of the turtle, right? Let's say the earth is supported by an infinite number of turtles, right? Let's say that I kill 5 of those turtles, right? So how many turtles are left? Infinite, right? Okay, but how many turtles were there before I killed those turtles? Infinite. So yeah, so this leads to contradiction, right? So in this infinite chain of in this infinite chain, having 5 turtles and not having 5 turtles is the same, which is not possible. That's like me saying that, you know, the number 5 and the number -5 is the same. No, it's a contradiction. I mean, like, it doesn't make any sense.
Another instance of appeal to intuition. Also, even if I grant the entire argument, why call the purely actual actualizer God? Why assume that this actualizer is conscious or intelligent?
He says, why say the purely actual actualizer God? Because this is one of the attribute of God, which is that he causes everything. That includes change or actualization. Now I have already dealt with why intelligence is required for the actualizer argument to work. Check my video on Cosmological Skeptic and Ben Shapiro. However, just to briefly touch on it here, Drew is saying why think the purely actualizer is intelligent. Well, this can be proven multiple ways. Imagine that you have a blue house. Then one day you wake up and realize your whole house has been painted red. In this situation, would you think your house changed by itself and turned red? Or would you think some intelligent person painted it red? Obviously it's the later. Same thing here. If change exists, then you need to explain what is causing that change. If you think it can just happen by itself, then you need to explain why you don't think the house changed color by itself. If change requires intelligence here, then it logically follows that if change is happening in nature, then that also probably require intelligence or will.
Lastly, why assume it's a single thing rather than multiple? Why can't there be multiple purely actual things if there has to be at least one? If the consciousness or intelligence of this thing is being assumed, couldn't this argument be used to support forms of theism other than...
And why can it be the case that there are multiple gods, right? Now, I've already made a response to on my channel regarding Hinduism, where I refuted the core idea of paganism and Hinduism, which is the idea that it leads to contradiction, and any idea that leads to contradiction is automatically rejected because that requires more explanation, or it doesn't make sense because we don't accept ideas that has contradictions in them, right? This idea of gods or polytheism actually leads to contradiction. In Hinduism, there is this idea of Trimurti. Trimurti is kind of like the Christian Trinity. So basically, they have like these three main gods or godhead. It's called known as Trimurti. So these main gods are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. So these are like the three main all-powerful kind of equal gods. And what's funny is that, so they all have assigned role, and they're supposed to be, I'm guessing that they're supposed to be all-powerful and equally all-powerful. So it's kind of interesting because this actually creates a dilemma and a contradiction. And this is true for any polytheistic religion, not just Hinduism. Which is that, imagine a scenario, right? Imagine Vishnu, the preserver, who is supposed to be all-powerful, who preserves all things, right? Imagine one day he wakes up and he decides that, you know what? I'm going to preserve Earth for all eternity. And then you have Shiva, who's the destroyer, who destroys all things, right? He decides, you know what? I'm going to destroy Earth today. What's going to happen? Will the Earth be destroyed or will it be preserved? Now, if the Earth is preserved, that means that Vishnu is the real God and he was able to preserve the Earth, and Shiva was a fake God, or like someone who doesn't deserve the title of God because he couldn't destroy the Earth, right? Or if the Earth is destroyed, then Vishnu is the fraud because he couldn't preserve Earth, and Shiva is the real God, right? So you have a contradiction here. So what do? So the only way Hinduism or any polytheistic religion can be consistent is if both the Earth is both preserved and destroyed at the same time. Because if they're all equally powerful, then that should be possible, right? That has to be possible. Otherwise, this theology doesn't make any sense. But is that possible? No. It's a logical contradiction. Something cannot be both preserved and be destroyed at the same time. Which is why, and this proves why Hinduism or any other polytheistic religions are false.
His claim that the evolutionary process relieved the need for God. After all, if God wasn't directing the process of the creation of human beings in the literalistic interpretation of the biblical creation story, who needed God? The problem, of course, is that evolution is an extraordinarily complex process that does not forestall the possibility of a directing hand. Stephen Meyer, an intelligent design advocate, points out that the transmission of information via cellular processes looks an awful lot like an intelligent creator transmitting information. Our experience of the world shows that what we recognize as information invariably reflects the prior activity of conscious and intelligent persons. What then should we make of the presence of information in living organisms?
John Perry here. I teach genetics, evolution, and chemistry, and I've been invited to come on and talk about this little trick that Stephen Meyer has been playing on his audience. Here is the Stephen Meyer quote that deceived Ben Shapiro. Now, in order to spot the deception here, the deception which Stephen Meyer presents in the form of a carefully crafted half-truth, we need to understand signaling theory. This is a subfield of evolutionary biology that's not super well known to the general public and apparently is not known to Ben Shapiro, given that he seems to have fallen for Meyer's trick. Let's unpack the deception by first looking at what Stephen Meyer says that is true, and then we'll look at what he is carefully hiding from his followers. So when he says the transmission of information via cellular processes looks an awful lot like an intelligent creator transmitting information, that's a pretty fair claim. The world of biology is chock full of signaling systems. Many of those systems function in fundamentally the same way as man-made signaling systems. Sure, the first part of Stephen Meyer's claim is okay. It's fine. The transmission of information via cellular processes really does look a lot like how we transmit information via language and various coding systems we invented to transmit information through wires, radio waves, and so on. But then he goes on to say this. Our experience of the world shows that what we recognize as information invariably reflects the prior activity of conscious and intelligent persons. What then should we make of the presence of information in living organisms? This is where Stephen Meyer is deceiving his audience, and he's doing it very carefully. Instead of explicitly lying to deceive, he simply hides a very important fact from his followers. Stephen Meyer has a PhD in the history and philosophy of science, and he got that from Cambridge University. Knowing that about his educational background, it is pretty much guaranteed that Stephen Meyer understands exactly what scientists make of information found in living organisms. Decades ago, biologists discovered how signaling systems naturally emerge. Signaling systems, symbol-based information systems.
You can have two explanations, right? One is that you have this complex process, which is, adding more complexity as life goes on, or this evolutionary process is happening. And either it's the case that, there's an intelligent being that's doing this, or is the case that it's just happened to have some kind of random chain of events that is causing this? So when you look at these two possibilities, which one requires the most explanation? It's the random one, right? This naturalistic kind of like random thing, you have to have this universe form, then all this other kind of stuff that has to happen, it requires more explanation than to say that there's an intelligent being that has just caused this, right? So it's a simple Occam's razor just refutes this whole nonsense. I mean, even if you accept that evolution is true,
Science is not absolute. Rather, science is just a description of reality. It can be fallible because of the lack of data. It suffers from an induction problem and other problems as well. One single data can overturn the entire scientific data. Now, in this video, he showed a paper of 1992 where a single theory needs to be explained by evolution or something like that. But actually, no, it's not. If you look at recent research papers, you will see that there are a lot of gaps and a lot of assumptions are being assumed. And this is an unnecessary hypothesis according to many researchers. I'll put the links below. And if you see another journal which is published in 2012, where biologists stated that in a natural way you can never explain the genetic code or the origin of life. So that's it. I mean, why appeal to evolution if they have their own disputes against themselves? Evolution is by itself is disputing, although it's very famous. Popularizing a theory doesn't mean that it's true by default. You have to challenge sometimes the popular theories to know the truth. Thank you.
The biggest scientific problem for atheists lies in the nature of the universe itself. The Big Bang is the theory that holds that the universe began with the explosion outward of a high-density pinpoint of matter, which sounds an awful lot like the creation story at the beginning of the Bible.
That's another instance of an incomplete argument. I can't believe I have to actually say this, but this sounds a lot like a Bible story is not an argument. Besides, the only thing the Big Bang and biblical creation story have in common is the idea that the current form of the universe had a point of origin. The Big Bang has nothing to do with a cosmic being hovering over the primordial water, looking at a shapeless earth, and then making things in this sequence. If this level of similarity is your bar for confirming a religious narrative, then you should actually be a Muslim. See, the Quran agrees with the biblical creation story, but adds some details of its own, like we created from water every living thing. We now know that water makes up the majority of every life form's mass, and water plays a major role in hypotheses of abiogenesis. This sounds a lot like the verse from the Quran. So that's it, right? Islam confirmed, atheism, Christianity, Judaism, and the rest debunked. Obviously no. A simple application of Occam's razor tells us that it's more likely that vague similarities between ancient religious narratives and modern scientific findings are coincidental, not that every such similarity confirms the divine inspiration of the religion to which it belongs.
Saying that something is a coincidence, it's not an argument.
If you have a calculator and you use it 99 times and each time it gives you the correct answer, would you doubt that calculator in the 100th time? Same thing here. If the Quran is giving you naturally or scientifically accurate information, if this happens once or twice, you can ignore it as coincidence. However, if this happens over and over again, then you cannot say this is a coincidence. This is not to say the Holy Quran is a book of science. It could be your interpretation is wrong based on the science of tafsir, or it could be that the science itself is wrong. However, when both of these criteria have been met and this is happening over and over again, then you can't just brush it off as a coincidence. That would be fallacious.
So the whole scientific argument which is made popularized by Dr. Zakir Naik and others, is that there are certain similarities between the natural world and the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the natural world, right? How do you explain that? Because at the time that the Prophet lived, people didn't know this, right? And so we look at all the kind of like similarities, and when you compile them all together, you can make a very strong and convincing case. Now, one of the best things about this argument is that it's a probabilistic argument. Okay, it's not making some kind of deductive argument in the sense that this absolutely proves Islam to be true. It's more like it's giving you a very good probabilistic reasoning for why Islam is true.
The very specific conditions under which our universe was created that allowed for the development of intelligent human life are often used by believers as proof of God's hand. The so-called fine-tuning of the universe for life is extraordinary. If, for example, the strength of the Big Bang had differed by 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, the universe just would not exist the way that it does right now.
If the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever.
Atheists claim that just because you won the lottery doesn't mean that you won because somebody intended for you to win the lottery. Somebody had to win. But that doesn't answer the question. If you kept winning the lottery over and over and over and over again, billions of times, at some point, you might suppose that somebody was cheating.
Yeah, the problem with the fine-tuning argument is that no one has ever determined that the universe was the result of a lottery at all. That is, it hasn't been demonstrated that the development of the cosmological constants or the formation of the universe as we know it was unlikely. In order to determine a probability for something, you have to have a data set to draw upon. To determine that the cosmological constants of our universe were unlikely and therefore required fine-tuning, we'd have to observe the constants of other universes and see that they're unlike ours. We obviously can't do that, though. So because a data set of 1 is not enough to determine probability, the idea that the universe as we know it was unlikely to form is baseless.
Okay, so here he's committing the non sequitur fallacy, right? The conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. I mean, this idea that, you need like an entire multiverse of like data to explain a simple deduction is absurd. This is absurd. Like, for example, imagine this, right? So the whole idea of fine-tuning, so for example, in Islam we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is the inventor, right? He's the one who created everything. He's the one who shapes everything, right? Now obviously he's trying to give the explanation that the opposite is true. Now just to explain the fine-tuning argument a little bit, so basically the fine-tuning argument is something like this, right? So for example, if you look at the cosmological constants, right? For example, if you look at the rate at which the universe expanded, if that was changed a little bit, then universe doesn't expand on the way that it did, and it doesn't lead to life on Earth, right? Or how about this way? If the Earth was a little farther away from the Goldilocks zone, then there would be life on Earth. Same way, there's so many cases where if the equation was just a little bit different, life wouldn't have formed. Like for example, the temperature of the Earth and the shape, like everything has to come in place perfectly for it to work. And this is basically the argument in a nutshell. So basically the idea is that think of like a car, right? Now by looking at a car, and if you look at a car and if we change certain properties of that car, we can determine what the car was made for, right? Like for example, if you take a car and you take out its tires and you see that the car can no longer function properly, then the reason the car was the car had tires is so that it can move. Why is it the case this cosmological constants is the way that it is instead of some other way, right? Like why couldn't it be the case that it developed in a way where it didn't lead to life, right? And even if you accept this explanation, you still have to it still falls into the same problem, right? Like for example, you can ask the question that if this there is multiple universes and it's just happening randomly, then if you change a few things in the universe, does it lead to the same outcome? No, it doesn't. So why is it the case? Then you have fall into the same problem. they need to explain what caused that chain of events to be the way it is, right? And then you could say, well, that chain of event was caused by another chain of event that was caused by another chain of event, and so on and so forth. So this would just require, you can go on for an infinity, and as we know, infinite regress is not possible. So it's more likely that there is a creator, and he's the one who's shaped things in a way that leads to life. Now, just to show like how disingenuous some of these people are, what he's basically saying is that in order to make this like simple deduction, you have to actually look at the entire multiverse, which by the way there's no evidence that it even exists. You have to look at the entire multiverse. Like, for example, imagine this, right? Imagine you're walking in the street, and all of a sudden you come across a dead body that has a knife stuck into the stomach, and you call the cops, right? And the cops find a fingerprint of this guy. Now let's call him I don't know, like Chris, right? So you find this fingerprint of this guy Chris, and they catch him, right? And then the Chris says that, actually, how do you know that I murdered this guy? Then the cop says that, oh, we found your fingerprints. And he says that, but you can't just conclude that, using deduction, that just because my fingerprint was on the handle of the knife, therefore I murdered the person, because you're just making the conclusion based on one data set. I mean, why? Because in order for you to make a conclusion like that, you have to look at all the other different universes, right? You have to look at a universe where this person was just walking and he just happened to fall down, and just got stabbed by accident. Or you have to look at a universe where knives are sentient and just come and like they just stab people. And this is absurd. This is absurd. Like, no one thinks like this. And no one says that, when we look at something, instead of making like a logical deduction, the way the fine-tuning proponents are doing, instead of doing that, you have to look at the entire quote-unquote data set, which means that you have to look at all the possible kind of like universes and then determine how likely or unlikely it is. This is absurd. Like, no one thinks like this. And this is how these people like are completely disingenuous. These people are not being honest.
Atheists commonly turn to since believers to explain why they oppose belief in God. This is a key point for people like Sam Harris, which you dog it. If religion is good, why are religious believers often so bad? And that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things, believing that they are good. Of course, one could ask this about any philosophy. Most people are in fact sinful and wicked, and have the capacity for good. The question is whether there is a philosophical connection between the religion and what its purported believers do. And more deeply, how are we supposed to judge whether the religion is promoting something morally good or evil without another frame of moral reference?
All first, that said, I don't think Shapiro's view of religious harm is any better. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, but it sounds like he's saying that when we observe the religious harming others, we should only consider whether the underlying religious system philosophically justifies such behavior. If it doesn't, then the religious system is not at all to blame. This is overly reductive and potentially dangerous. Okay, kids, you know what time it is? It's time for a sociology lesson. Acceptance of a philosophical position isn't all there is to religion. Sociologists and scholars of religious studies often utilize what's called the 3B framework of religious identity formation. The 3 want to determine if a person's religion has led to a particular action, then we should consider the rituals they engage in, the people they hang out with, the norms associated with their group, and the media they consume, among other things, on top of their religious beliefs. Defining a religious system by nothing but the beliefs or philosophy involved is also an issue because it allows individuals within a religious system to easily escape accountability for any harm done in the name of their religion.
So here he's committing the special pleading fallacy, right? He's making a special case for religious people without any good logical justification. Because you need to understand that this whole concept, this nonsensical concept that he just showed. So anyway, so this model of like belief, behavior, and belonging, you can put it on anything. You can put it on communism. Like, for example, communist or at least socialists believe that there's this like kind of like there has to be this kind of like communist utopia that has to be achieved, and in order to achieve that, they're going to behave in a way that to achieve that, then they're going to belong to this group, which is the socialist or communist. So yeah, that easily fits into this model. Then there's capitalism, right? They believe that gaining the most amount of money is the best thing for you, and they will behave in that manner, and then they'll belong in the group of like making money. You have things like cryptocurrency and whatnot. You have this little group, and all this other kind of you can take any group, and you can fit into this kind of like model. So this is kind of hilarious. So basically, he's committing the fallacy of being consistent. He's being consistent. He is again only making this argument and attacking religious people and religious identity, and completely ignoring all this other kind of religious identity, right? which I would count as religious, the most reason is problematic because usually this type of extremist actions are done by a very small minority. So the proper argument that I would levy is that this is generalization, because you cannot take this small group of people or guilt by association, right? So, for example, you cannot take this action of this small group of people, then say that because this larger group of people are associated with them, therefore, they're both guilty. No, it's just this small group of people are guilty of this. And this is the case with all kind of like extremist group, whether it's like a liberal extremist or like kind of like communist extremist or Islamic extremist or whatever, right? Or Kharijis or whatever. It's extremists. They don't represent either the religious belief in a proper way or the group that you're trying to describe. And I want a special thanks to Brother Shimanto. I show him a lot of love. Inshallah, alhamdulillah, he's a very talented up-and-coming apologist or duat. Inshallah, we'll see more of him on my channel, especially when I do like more debunking of like scientific like claims by atheists. If you guys like the video, like, share, subscribe. And if you want to support me, then you can support me on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.